Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Sanyin Siang. Grace Under Pressure, those of you who watch the show know that it's about the soft stuff, the stuff that is too often dismissed. We talk about the caring, the commitment, the compassion we feel toward others. And when you do it as a leader, as you will find that Sanyin is, we do it for the greater good to bring people together for common cause. So welcome, Sanyin Siang. It is such a pleasure to have you on the show.
It's so good to be here, John. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, great. I want to tell folks about you. You help leaders launch and create value by focusing on the mindset, behavior change, culture building. You are a CEO coach, and you are the executive director of the Fuqua Coach K Center, which we're going to talk all about at Duke University. This center is a leadership lab that involves all the Duke daytime students and MBA students, I say, and it's kind of a think tank, but also an opportunity, I'm going to guess, to exchange ideas on leadership. In your corporate life, you work with C-suiters, and you are a noted author. You've been quoted all over the place, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, CNN, and most importantly, you are on the voted #1 executive coach by Marshall Goldsmith and Thinkers 50. So that is quite a feat. And you've worked for some of the biggest names in business, but you also have an award-winning book called The Launch Book, Motivational Stories for Launching Your Business or Your Next Career. And folks, I want to say a personal note. Sanyin is a fellow member of the MG 100 coaches. And not only is she respected, she is revered. So Sanyin, it is an honor to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much, John, for that generous introduction. All people need to know about me is that my mission in life is to enable greatness in others. That's it. All those things are just extensions and validations of I'm doing exactly what I should be doing.
Great. I'm going to ask you to kick up your volume one more time, if I would, please. Thank you.
Can you hear me now? Is that better?
Yes. Okay, great. So let's talk about the Sports Innovation Center. What is it and what do you do?
So the Sports Innovation Lab is a tech startup that was started up by my great friend, Angela Ruggiero. Angela is a 4-time Olympian and the most decorated female ice hockey player in the history of the sport. And the Sports Innovation Lab, they have this Fluid Fan project, which is about let's rethink how sports is being consumed, right? And just as in leadership, it's not only about the leader. So much is now we have to be follower-centric. In sports with fans, we also have to be fan-centric. So instead of, say, being able to segment fans according to demographics, let's segment fans according to behaviors. And there's a democratization aspect with that. I'm a proud tech advisor for the Sports Innovation Lab. And actually tomorrow we're having a in-person board meeting. I'm hopping on my first plane ride since March 2020 to New York City because Billie Jean King, who is also a member of the small leadership board, Women's Leadership Board with the Sports Innovation Lab, we're having our board meeting, and she's also hosting us at the US Open in her suite.
Well, what a wonderful thing, because Billie Jean King has been at the forefront of women in athletics for 50 years. I mean, without her, the women's tennis may not be as professional as it is now, but she's been an inspiration to so many. So what a remarkable opportunity.
Well, and talk about personification of grace. And I love your definition of grace, which is a catalyst for the greater good, right? And so Billie Jean King and her partner Lana Kloss, that's what they're all about, creating equity, having a more equitable world.
Well, that's what we all strive for, but it's so wonderful to hear it come from the world of sport, which I am a sports fan, but I don't generally consider it a place for equity. But that I'm glad that it's becoming that way. It certainly must be. So you have another role, and because that's the director of the Coach K, as in Krzyzewski Center of Leadership and Ethics at Duke. So what does the center do? So,
All right. So to really understand what the center does, we have to understand the origin story of the center. So back in 2003, our dean at that time, Doug Breeden, we were looking at where the world of business is going. And we realized it's necessary to give our MBA students insights and arm them with the tools for marketing and finance, but that's insufficient unless we also arm them with the tools for becoming the type of leaders the society needs. So at that time, we look across the street, literally, at Duke Athletics, and there was Coach K. And Coach K is someone who's not only in sports, he pervades so much more beyond that. He's looking also at business, at nonprofits to draw leadership lessons. And we said, why don't we team up? So the Fuqua School of Business and Coach K teamed up to launch the center, and I'm its founding executive director. So we exist to, one, be able to help our MBA students become even more effective leaders and be stewards of the leadership culture at the Fuqua School of Business. And then two, in order to do that, we started reaching out to all these leaders of influence across sectors and industries, military and corporate and tech founders, and discover that the assumptions which our predecessors operated under no longer apply, right? And so we became a think tank also for thinking through leadership for what's next. What are the enduring aspects of leadership for now, and then what needs to change for the future?
that's wonderful. A couple of guests ago is a longtime friend of mine and has been something of a mentor to me, Michael Usine. And Michael at Wharton was, I want to say, a pioneer in leadership development education, bringing people from certainly the military, the arts, and of course business. And he's been doing it for a long, long time. So I'm wonderful. I'm going to say in a way that you're continuing his legacy and that kind of stuff. Multidisciplinary leadership. Can I call it that? So.
Yes, let's call it multidisciplinary leadership. I love that. And also, I'm a huge fan of Michael's book, Leading Up. That's because that book is all about leadership isn't position or titles. It's really about influence.
Well, I will tell you a funny story about that, and I will and an insight into the kindness of Michael. I read that book, and then I came up with the idea of I wanted to do something about managing and leading up. So I came up with a book called "Lead Your Boss," which is the subtitle of Michael's book, "Leading Up." So I stole it from him, and I didn't really inadvertently, and the book is going to press, and I thought, oh my God, I got to call him and tell him. And he said, don't worry, who cares? But what a kind person he was. So not only did he influence me, I even stole from him and I didn't even know it. And that is a great book. It is. And I like the idea because we always think of leadership as top down. And it's not. It so often comes from the trenches. And that was my book is really about influence, which is the subtext of Michael's book too. So I'm glad that's being leveraged in different ways. So, and you have on your board, if I'm not correct, Shane Battier. Is he?
Yeah. So Shane is a dear friend, and I know we have now also a shared connection.
Yeah.
Shane he joined us as a distinguished fellow this year for our center. And what I love about Shane is when we think about how leadership is different today, the team is the essential unit, not the individual. The team is the essential unit of success in any organization. And our systems are still relying on individualistic contributions, right? Recognizing individual contributions. And yet with Shane, I mean, not only is he brilliant and, with his Shane Battier Take Charge Foundation for helping first-gen college hopefuls, but Shane also exemplifies the type of team player leadership that we need today. So Michael Lewis wrote a book called The No Stats All-Star, which about Shane, wrote an article about Shane that's called The No Stats All-Star.
Yeah.
His individual stats compared to his teammates may not be exceptional. However, when Shane is on the court, the entire team plays so much better than when he is off the court.
Isn't that such a wonderful thing? And there's so many, I mean, a one word for that is, quote, we call them the role players, but they play such a significant role, and without them, the team would not gel.
Yes.
And we see, and especially a sport like basketball, because there's only 5 on a court at a time, you can actually see that. So it is quite remarkable. And you know what? It's a testament, because Shane was a star at high school, and then of course an all-star at Duke, and led you to a national championship. And when he got to the pros, he had to adapt to a different role, if I know his history enough. So and a lot of athletes could not do that. So.
Shane is whatever he engages in, whatever context, he will surely succeed, because he's got all the the resilience, the heart for service, the brilliance, the compassion, everything we talk about when you talk about grace under pressure. Shane's got.
Well, and what's good about that is that he's playing a role with your center, so that your students, MBA students, get a different perspective on leadership. Because so often when we think of, just as you said, it's the top man, and I want to be CEO, and that's a male-dominated type thing, unfortunately. But there's so much else that goes into it, and so I'm guessing that's the work that your center focuses on, a more holistic sense. Am I correct? So
yes. Absolutely. And actually the holistic sense is where leaders have to go towards, right? The world is becoming too complex for any single person to have all the answers. And even if you take the most brilliant person in the world who's good at everything, there's not enough to exercise that, all that. And so we need teams. We need teams.
Right. And nobody has all the answers anyway, even if they think they do. And people who think they have all the answers really don't, because they're covering up for something else. And so, that's what's great. It's interesting. Years ago, when I would do in some of my presentations, people would say, what's changed in leadership? And I would like to have a little fun with them. And I go, absolutely nothing. Because the lessons of leadership are timeless, from the time when we were tribal, hunter-gatherers till now. But really, I was rethinking the issue. And as you dimensionalize, what has changed is the context.
Yes.
Of the velocity of change.
Yes.
But I think there's another aspect, and you were better input. The role of women in leadership has completely inverted the possibilities for the better of what leadership really is.
Yeah, I think that's when, our friend Frances Hesselbein, who's a dear, dear mentor, and someone I revere, Frances. What she made me realize is that Frances, for the listeners out there, Frances is former CEO of the Girl Scouts, turned around the 70,000 member plus volunteer organization, and then co-developed the Army's leader development methodology with General Shinseki. And then she led the Peter Drucker Institute, and is a presidential Medal of Freedom awardee. And if you meet Frances, I'm 5'1" and 3/4 tall. I think Frances might be 5'1", really soft-spoken. And, I remember thinking, wow, this is the face of a great leader. And today, the beautiful thing is, there is a no one-size-fits-all leader, right? Like, it's the diversity of faces, the diversity of experience, and context is so important, because it's dynamism.
And the other thing about Frances, who I've gotten to know a little bit and written about her, is that Peter Drucker called her the best leader he had ever met. And she was she's such a humble person too, but such a forceful. And what's interesting, I'm glad you mentioned her stature, because we have this, I remember it was at Wharton, it was a lecture by Pete Dawson, who was a former Army football star, the last Heisman Trophy winner, but also a distinguished military officer. And he said, we have this image of leaders as 19th century British cavalry officers, which would mean they're white, tall, handsome, and ride horses, none of which apply to our world today at all. And if we think about too much of the cavalry, remember the charge of the Light Brigade? Well, that didn't work out so well. And that's what's so different about that is we all carve our own marks from where we come.
Yeah, and I think we're in a world that's eager, because the face of leadership or what people perceive to be leadership based on what they see in the media or what's in history books was one where it's just very surface, right? In terms of the look. I think nowadays we're looking beneath the surface and saying, okay, here's the patterns of effective leadership, whether someone is a white male or a Asian female or a Black African American male or Hispanic or American Indian. I mean, just we're digging beneath the surface and say, the consistent pattern of leadership is one, great leaders care about their people. And when they care, that's how they can affect influence. And great leaders understand people want to be part of something bigger than themselves. And therefore,
right. And central to leadership is something which I think is in the subtext of your title. It's the Leadership and Ethics Center. Am I correct? So what role does ethics play? How do you teach it?
So ethics, one is understanding different value systems, but so the center, there's a curriculum that is within the faculty side of things at the business school. Our center deals with the co-curricular activities, and we're with character, right? We look over at Coach K. One of the reasons why we were so excited to partner with him is, he puts character first, character central to everything. Values are central to everything. And so how do we teach it? It's through experience. It's through experience, reflection, and mentorship, right? So our co-leadership fellows, these are second-year MBA students who are chosen by their predecessors to serve as the coaches and facilitators for every single first-year MBA daytime student at Fuqua, at the Fuqua School of Business. They were chosen by their predecessors not only for their skills and intelligence, but because they also exemplify character and values.
That's so important. And it's interesting. They're being, as you said, they're selected. And one of the bases is character, which is either assumed or not talked about. And then that's when we wonder why we go off the rails at sometimes. So, and do you, from your perspective now, and you've been at the center for a good long while, has the perspective on ethics changed over time? Is it more or less or the same? How do you feel about that, Sanyin?
So when we started the center, it was with the sense that we need to infuse more this idea of character-based leadership, values-based leadership into society today. And I think from these past, as the world, from this unprecedented past 20 months has seen, there's no more work or life. It's just life now. There's no work life. It's just life. Part of that is we need our leaders to be more human. And part of our leaders being more human is the values. That's what we're connecting with. Their values,
It's funny. I like the way you said we need our leaders to be more human. And what flashed into my mind is I think there's a reticence sometimes to be human, not in an overt way. I don't want to be perceived as soft. I don't want to be perceived as weak. Do you see that initially, Sanyin? So
I think we're in a transition moment, and certainly COVID has accelerated every single trend, and that we were already on that trend towards a more humanity-based leadership, right? And now I think there's an even greater embrace of that, and not only is it acceptable, people are seeing it as required. So Hubert Joly, for example, his book, The Heart of Business, we see so many of the books that are coming out right now about humanizing leadership. So yes, and I think that is a requirement of leadership for today, and that we can no longer rely purely on the intelligence and the skills. We also have to bring our whole selves into.
And, it's interesting. I'm glad you said that, because it's actually the market demands it. And I don't mean necessarily consumer, but if you look at your followers, your employees as your constituents, as your market, we don't want dinosaurs anymore. I'm older than you, and I began my career when it was top-down control and no feedback was never given, or feedback was given, it meant you had screwed up. Now it's completely inverted, which is only for the positive. So dinosaurs are going extinct. Unfortunately, not fast enough, but through efforts of places like yours, it's beginning to change. So it is changing. That's great. Now, I want to flip it to you just a little bit, because you wrote an article for Harvard Business Review with our colleague, Ron Carucci, where both of you got personal and made a link to parenting. So what the heck is parenting, and what do parenting and leadership have in common? So.
Well, let me just pause and give a plug for Ron Carucci's book. Ron is one of the most brilliant thinkers out there, and his new book is To Be Honest. If you haven't read it, go and get a copy, because that is so much of our conversation today. So Ron and I—
And Ron's coming on this show next week to talk all about that book. So.
That's great. What your viewers are in for a treat. So Ron and I got together because we noticed during the pandemic, a lot of parents were also struggling. And my kids are 11, 10, and 8. And I know even pre-COVID, I recognize that some of my greatest lessons in leadership come from parenting. That parenting is an act of leadership, right? Because just as we talked about earlier, when we were talking about Michael Using, and that it's not about command or control. Positional power means nothing to a 5-year-old.
I'm a grandfather now, and my older grandchild will be 3, and negotiation doesn't work.
It doesn't work. But when you think about all the human dynamic stuff, right? Like they need to know you love them and you care, right? And you think about all the different lessons. Like one I learned from David Robinson is that he said you have to love all of your children the same, but you can't parent them all the same. And that's the same thing in leadership. We have to love our teammates all the same, but we can't lead them all in the same way. Right? And so context matters. And so in this article, we talk through, well, what were some of in these crisis pressure built moments during the pandemic, what were some of the key lessons? And those include being able to draw on a larger community. This idea that we don't make it alone, draw on a larger community to understand what's happening and what are some of the best practices out there. That applies also to the workplace. Another one is the Pomodoro method. That is being able to compartmentalize our time and both multitasking, but I think about it as serial tasking. And then the third is, oh my gosh, can we be more compassionate?
Oh yeah.
Towards ourselves too.
And that's where you and I dovetailed right there, because that's why I have been attracted to grace and done a couple in my books on it, because we live in a gotcha culture, and it's okay to call people out. That's fine. Public figures, let's put it that way. But where is mercy? Where is forgiveness? And those are sparked by compassion. And we need to make it comfortable for people to be compassionate. So,
but it starts with us being able to forgive ourselves, being compassionate with ourselves. Because my next body of work is about superpowers. Because I've noticed that with high achievers, we play our mistakes over and over in our heads. Can we forgive ourselves?
Oh, you are so true with that. You talk to people. I got a lessons with a great coach here at Michigan, like a Coach K. Red Berenson was the hockey coach, and he had a legendary career at both, and first college player ever to go play in the NHL, and then went on and won the Stanley Cup and all kinds of great things. So he's a well-known coach and stuff. But he said that when he coached his players, he said, if I have a freshman and I raise my voice, I lose that kid for 3 weeks, because all he hears is this negative thing. So you have to approach it. And whereas a senior, he said, if I don't raise my voice, they don't even listen. So, and Red's a very low key type of person, but you're right. We have to find where that is and how we connect with people, hold people accountable, but how we do it is so important.
And also catch them succeeding. We have to catch them succeeding. We don't do that often enough.
No, because we're always looking for mistakes. So.
I think it's this idea that we're raised in a society that, let's talk about, like, when we give feedback, we think the sole goal of feedback is to empower the other person to be better. That's a sole goal of impact. It's about the other person. And yet we think the only thing that can empower them is the things that are their deficiencies, right? When also data about their proficiencies, their superpowers, which is often one of our biggest blind spots, can also empower them to be even better too.
No, that's so powerful. It's something when and I'm sure you do the same thing when I work with executives and I teach them about coaching their people. I always say, maybe it's a cliche, but open with an affirmative, so at least, and maybe it's sounds like kindergarten, but I think it works. So anyway, so we're racing toward the end of our show, and we could go on for another hour, but I know you have so much more to go. But I always ask, and you know this, I ask guests for a story about grace. Is there a story that you want to share about grace, Sanyin?
Yeah, grace is a big word. It's a big word because I think it's recognizing the small moments that matter, that are significant. Right? Grace often happens in the small moments and it's unseen. So a moment of grace, I've seen so many with my students, like their help for each other, neighbors. There's so much goodness right now. But the one I remember is from one of my great mentors, Greg Jones. Greg is the current president of Belmont University, and he was also, he's the former dean of the divinity school at Duke University.
Oh, wow.
And Greg has this, the language Greg uses is one of imagination, energy, energizing, a soulful language. And I remember earlier on in my career, when I was still falling a lot more to the comparison trap, I remember being in tears one day as I was talking to Greg. I'm like, you know what? I've done nothing. I've accomplished nothing. I'm looking across at, my colleagues, my classmates, and they're doing so many amazing things. What am I doing? I'm like, and I was thinking about it in terms not of moments, not of the one-on-one interactions, but in terms of only the things that are visible, like how many books has one written, how many articles, all those traditional measures of success. And then Greg told me the story about his father. Greg said, and Greg's father passed away. Greg's father was also the dean of the Duke Divinity School many, many years ago, and passed away when he was dean. And Greg said, Greg's children never knew their grandfather. Mm-hmm. And so Greg said, my children, the stories that people tell about my dad, when my children's eyes lit up when they hear about their grandfather, isn't about how many books he's written, how many accolades he's won, but it's about those one-on-one moments when he made a difference in their lives. And and what Greg was trying to share with me is, and you see I'm like tearing up right now, is don't measure your life by those things. Measure your life by those one-to-one moments. Be mindful of those moments, like he was with me, like focused on, and helping me to see things a bit differently and to believe in myself. And so Greg is one of the greatest mentors because he believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. He saw possibilities in me that I didn't see in myself. And I think that's a common trait throughout all my wonderful mentors, like Marshall Goldsmith, Sim Sicken, who's the Mike Krzyzewski Chair at Duke University, Francis Hesselbein. It just goes on and on. So many, Edith Cooper. So I think we have to be mindful of those moments. And we have a big project as well called Life of Significance, dukesignificance.com, where it's podcasts and also entire series around can we call out the heroes in our lives, in our stories? And can we
And
speak what matters and how we want to matter? And it's in those moments.
that's great. Thank you. And I love the idea of grace as moment to moment, but it can be transactional, but and those moments can be transformative. That what you told you about your mentor, his sharing his story with you, or listening to you, believing in you when you didn't. For him, that's a small moment. For you, that was an act of transformation. And
Yes.
how extraordinary. How very extraordinary. And anyway, so we're coming to the end. And so I would say, Sanyin, how can people find you?
So one is on LinkedIn. I post there regularly, and I also have a biweekly newsletter called Leadership Playbook launch. And then through there, I also am starting up one on Substack on superpowers. And so those are the two places, leadershipplaybook.substack.com or on LinkedIn. Just look me up, Sanyin Siang, and look up Leadership Playbook.
Great. Well, I will put that in the notes. Sanyin, it has been an honor to have you on the show. And with that, we're going to close out. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, John.